Which GT3 is selling the best and which is selling the worst? The answer may surprise you. Not only do we have a clear winner, but it's by almost 3 times as much. What we're going to find out is that the 992 GT3 is selling the worst of all the generations. Which one's selling best? Stay tuned. First, we're going to get into the specs of each of the cars, and then we're going to get into the sales data and see what it tells us. First up is the 996 GT3. This was originally produced in 1999 and it was not brought to the US market. Later in the 996.2, it was brought to the US market in 2004. This car made 375 horsepower and it had 0-60 in about 4.5 seconds. An additional stat that I'm going to have for each generation is that Porsche would take a car, usually in a later configuration, and they would run a lap around the Nürburgring. For the 996.2 GT3 RS, they did it in 7:43. Next up is the 997 GT3. They came out with the 997.1 in 2006, which had 409 horsepower, and then later in 2009, they came out with the .2. The 997.2 GT3 had a 0-60 around 4.1 seconds and it made 429 horsepower. A little later on in the final configuration, they made a 997.2 GT3 RS 4.0, and so it had a 4-liter engine in it. That one made 493 horsepower, and they took that car to the Nürburgring, which did it in 7 minutes and 27 seconds. I've had some seat time in the 997 generation, specifically the .2, and they're amazing cars. I didn't have as much track experience as I have now when I first got exposed to this car, but nonetheless, it was a great car, and I really enjoyed the 997.2 GT3s. Moving on to the 991 GT3, it was introduced in 2013 with the 991.1 spec for the GT3, and this car made 469 horsepower. It had a 0-60 around 3.5 seconds, and it was only offered with the PDK transmission, which is Porsche's dual clutch transmission. We know that that changed really quickly though. Remembering back to the 997.2 where they introduced the 4-liter engine towards the end of the cycle with the GT3 RS, well, that engine makes a comeback now with the 991.2, making 493 horsepower, and that engine carries forward from this point. Also reintroduced was the manual transmission, which only was vacant for the 991.1. A new introduction for the 991.2 was the touring model, which is essentially a streetier version of the GT3. With the full-out 991.2 GT3 RS, they were able to lap around the Nürburgring in 6 minutes and 56 seconds, which was a full 30 seconds faster than the 997.2 GT3 RS. I've actually seen the 991 RSR that was raced back in 2017 going forward from that point, and I've seen it at the 24 Hours of Le Mans as well as Daytona, and here's some pictures of it at Le Mans in 2017. They didn't win in 2017, but they did win in 2018. For the 991.1, we should talk about issues. So there was engine failures that occurred with this car early on, and they identified 785 cars that had rod bolt material problems and things of that nature. And so those 785 cars got replacement engines. Also, there was a follow-on issue that came from that, and essentially what happened was all 991.1 GT3s got a 10-year fully transferable 120,000 mile warranty for the engines. I've spent time in both the 991.1 and .2 GT3s on track, and I think that they're amazing cars, and if I had the means, this is the generation that I'd probably go after. Probably the .2, but nonetheless, it is an amazing car on track. And that brings us to the 992.1 spec of the GT3, which had an MSRP starting around $170,000 and going well north from there. It had a 503 horsepower version of the exact same power plant that was in the 991.2. It had a 0-60 that was around 3.4 seconds. And they said that the downforce on this car was doubled from what it was in the previous generation, so that had a significant positive impact on track performance and lap times. However, there is no lap time on this car from Porsche officially, and there's a whole lot of speculation around this, from tires to waiting on a Mercedes-Benz Black Series to lap, and they're kind of waiting that out so that they can be the fastest time and not have to go back and redo it. And so there's a whole lot of games being played on this one.
Incredible. They're playing games.
Before we jump into the spicy sales data, I want to say thank you very much for watching. And if you're enjoying this content, please give me a thumbs up below as well as hit the subscribe button, and I'd appreciate that greatly. Also, please leave a note in the comments down below of what generation of the GT3 you prefer and why. All right, now we're going to hop into the sales data. We're going to start off with the 996. What I'm going to do on all these is combine the cars and bids as well as bring a trailer so that we can paint a really good picture of the retail market for these cars and these generations. So I'm going to look at my screen here so I don't get the numbers wrong. But on the two sites, there were 71 listings of the 996 GT3. 13 of them did not make reserve, which is about an 18% no sale. Now, the average on all the sites is around 20%, so this is a little bit better than the average, and that's a good thing for the 996 GT3. Looking a little bit deeper into this chart, you can see how the prices have continued an uptrend over the last 3 years, and now an average car will sell in the 90s with nicer low mileage examples above 100. I'll show the trend lines on this chart showing the trending upslope in sales so that you can better see that. The ones in the higher ranges above that either have very low mileage or some special set of options, or they're a rare version. Average price right now is around $90K or in the low 90s. If you compare that to 3 years ago where the average was around $75,000 or lower, that's an increase of about 20% or better in price in the last 2 to 3 years. All right, so the 996 GT3s are looking really good. How's the 997s looking? So we're going to take a look at those numbers right here. Again, combined from cars and bids and bring a trailer. So 157 listings for the 997, much more prolific than the 996s. And there was 46 that did not make the reserve, which is a 29% no sale. If you look at the sales chart on these 997 sales, you can see how they've trended up since 2018. Not dramatically, but overall the trend is up, with maybe this last year an exception. And specifically in this last year, there's been a significant amount of reserves not met. We're going to take a look at that a little bit deeper here, and you can see that 40% of all these 997 GT3s listed since this time last year have not sold. Going back to the full sales chart for the 997s, going back to 2018, it's hard to put an average price on these just because of so many special models and cup cars and these types of things. But that being said, you can get a 997 GT3 with miles on it in the low hundreds and nice examples in the mid hundreds. And if you look at this chart where we have some of the most recent sales, you'll see those prices. I would look for higher mileage ones to drop in the near future, but not a lot. Low mileage examples are still going to be bringing most of the money. Okay, now we're going to move into most recent times with the 991s. And remember, they had some problems, but has that affected the sales data on them? So combined off of both sites, there's been 286 of these listed. 73 of them did not make reserve, and that's a 26% no sale, which is slightly worse than the average, but still pretty good sales overall. Looking at the prices on these, they've remained very consistent since the beginning of 2013, with sales on Bring a Trailer going back to only 2018. The range is from the low hundreds to the high 200s, and condition, mileage, color all play massive roles in how much money each one of these cars are bringing. Unlike the 997s, the 991s have slightly improved with their sales numbers in the past 2 years. For an average on these 991 GT3s, which includes the touring as well, the average I would say is right around $190,000. And if you take a look at the image of the most recent sales, you can see how they're pretty much centered around $190,000 for the most recent sales. All right, now lastly, in the most recent 992 sales figures. So if I take a look at these, we had about 52 of them listed, and 20 of them have not made the reserve. That's a 40% no sale, which is double.
It's double top secret.
What the average is on the site. So these are not selling very well at all, either due to high reserves or people just not willing to pay the money or whatever the case may be. So these are not selling well at all. While this group is relatively new, we still have enough sales data so we can draw some conclusions. So if we look at the chart, you can immediately see a decline from around 300,000 to as low as 220,000. You can see the trend on the chart going down. There was an auction a month ago for a 2022 British Racing Green Touring 6-speed that everyone lost their minds over. And obviously, taking a look at these pictures, it looks really good, and it sold for $340,000. And aside from that, the range has been fairly consistent. So what's the speculation and commentary around Porsche as well as 911 GT3s? So if we go back about a year, there was a boat that sank in the Atlantic that was carrying somewhere between 1,200 and 2,000 Porsches, as well as a whole bunch of other VW Group cars. And then there was another boat that was behind that was named the Prestige, and there was some cars that were damaged on that boat. That had an impact on deliveries as well as on the supply chain for those cars going back a year. These incidences have only exacerbated the backlog on the car. The backlog has just fanned the flame of the dealer markups and ADMs on Porsches as a whole, but specifically in this case on the 911 GT3s and GT3 Tourings. But nonetheless, these markups are excessive, and it has driven the used market to be excessive as well, and that's why we see prices that are averaging much above MSRP for the used market on these cars when they're basically delivery miles or 2,000-3,000 mile cars. As a whole, that drives up the older cars as well because demand for the whole segment has went up. All that being said, the GT3 market as a whole is doing very well. The 996.2s are increasing in value. The rest are maintaining for the most part, with the 992s are dropping a little, but overall they're all above MSRP, and they're a very strong market as a whole. I'm real curious of what your favorite spec and generation is, and so please put that in the comments down below. I'd love to see that. Also, if you enjoyed this content, please remember to like and to subscribe to the channel so that you can get notification for our polls where we vote on content going forward. And you'll also get notification of videos that we have coming up. And I'll see you in the next one.